Once again, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Angela Christiana. I am the Executive Director of the Calestous Juma Legacy Foundation. As you join us today, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat. Tell us your name and where in the world you are joining us from our global community. We'll be getting started just in one moment, and we would love to hear from you. Just to introduce yourselves. This is an informal chat. We'll be getting to know our guests, and we thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. So with that, I believe I'm going to go ahead and start straight into our program. We're right on time, right on the hour. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm in sunny Boston and welcoming you, giving you a very warm welcome to the inaugural Fireside Chat as part of the Calestous Juma Legacy Series. I'm Angela Christiana. I'm the Executive Director of the Calestous Juma Legacy Foundation. The Calestous Juma Legacy Foundation was established to steward Professor Juma's ideals, focusing on turning his vision of African self-reliance into tangible action. We are launching this series in collaboration with our partner institution, the African Center for Technology Studies, ACTS, as we refer to it, which Professor Juma founded and which has been at the forefront of policy research for decades. This joint legacy series, which includes fireside chats, thematic deep dives, and innovation showcases, is part of our commitment to ensuring his core principles remain relevant, that Africa's future must be driven by strategic innovation and homegrown solutions, moving beyond dependence on foreign aid. Today, we continue this movement with the theme, Living the Legacy from Mentorship to Leadership. Next slide. Before we start, I want to dedicate just a moment to honor Professor Calestous Juma. I always like to bring him into the room with us. Professor Juma was a global thought leader and a visionary. He served as professor of the practice of international development at Harvard Kennedy School and the faculty chair of the Edward S. Mason Fellows Program. He was also faculty chair of the Innovation for Economic Development Executive Program and director of the Science, Technology, and Globalization Project. Professor Juma directed the school's Agricultural Innovation in Africa and Health Innovation Policy in Africa projects, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In 2014 through 2015, he served as the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. visiting professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. All of that I just mentioned happened over here in Boston, but his heart was always focused on his home continent. He dedicated his life to redefining Africa's relationship with technology and development. His core philosophy, captured in his works like his book, The New Harvest, was the concept of leapfrogging. He argued that Africa didn't need to follow the slow, traditional path of industrialized nations. Instead, by strategically adopting new technologies and investing in new infrastructure like mobile payments, digital learning, and renewable energy, Africa could bypass older infrastructures and jump straight into most efficient solutions. Crucially, he wasn't talking about borrowing technology. He was talking about homegrown innovation and strong African-led institutions. The Calestous Juma Legacy Series is our commitment to being stewards of this vision. Every conversation we host is designed to honor his belief that Africa's greatest resource is its strategic intellect and human capital. So just to give you a glimpse into some of his thinking, let's watch a very short clip of him
his
speaking.
Work.
I think what excites me
His work.
I think what excites me is this interesting development where we have dramatic expansion of global challenges, environmental challenges, greater population. But hidden in that is also enormous creativity on the part of the global population, particularly among young people. And what excites me is that almost for every problem, there are young people who are focused on finding those problems, solutions to those problems. I've observed that, in fact, there's even a greater awareness of global challenges among high school kids. So I'm spending part of my time, in fact, introducing some of these principles on the role of engineering in solving global problems to high school kids. So we have a kind of an interesting situation where you have a greater challenges, but also greater interest in responding to those challenges. So the instinct of human beings to be more creative in face of challenges.
So throughout today, our event today, all participants are encouraged to put any questions in the chat so that we can share them with our speakers a bit later on. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Martin Mbaya. Martin is a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Technology Management of University of Pretoria, studying systemic barriers to innovation in digital learning. Martin is also a member of the faculty at Strathmore University Business School, focused on public policy, digital learning, entrepreneurship, innovation, trade, and sustainability. He's a co-founder of Akili AI startup focused on applications of generative AI in Africa's banking sector, where he leads policy and strategy. Martin is a member of the College of Scholars and a trustee of the African Center for Technology Studies. He has served in many governance roles, including currently a founding trustee for the Calestous Juma Legacy Trust, Kenya, and several others, which you can read here on the screen. Martin holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT and a master's degree in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School. Martin is also a 2015 Tutu Fellow. Martin's work applies directly to Professor Juma's principles across public policy, digital learning, and trade, where he teaches, consults, and grows enterprises. So Martin, before I introduce you, Judi, I just want to thank you so much for leading us in this conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela, and it's great to be here to honor Calestous.
Terrific. And Peter, if you can go ahead and spotlight Martin now, add him to the spotlights. And now it is my honor to introduce the Ambassador, Professor Judi Wakhungu. Ambassador Wakhungu is a pioneering figure in African leadership and policy. She served as Kenya's Minister of Environmental and Natural Resources, a tenure marked by globally unmatched legislation. These achievements include spearheading the ban on single-use plastic bags in Kenya in 2017, leading the historic burning of Kenya's ivory and rhino horn stockpiles to curb illegal wildlife trade, and enacting crucial laws such as the Wildlife Conservation Act of 2013, the Climate Change Act of 2016, and the Water Act 2016, and many other environmental and conservation regulations. Ambassador Wakhungu is also a recipient of major international recognition, including the Oceans Award 2018 and the Clark R. Bavin Award 2016. She holds the distinction of being Kenya's first woman pioneer in geology and has used that platform to mentor countless STEM students throughout her career. Following her time as minister, she served as Kenya's ambassador to 5 nations, including France, the Holy See, Portugal, Serbia, and Monaco. Notably, Professor Wakhungu served as the executive director of the African Center for Technology Studies for 11 years. Judi, we are deeply honored to welcome you. And Martin, the floor is yours to kick off this critical conversation. Peter, if you can just spotlight. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and welcome to all those who are joining us from around the world as we honor the legacy of Professor Calestous Juma. He was my mentor. He was my graduate supervisor between 2006 and 2008, and he introduced me to ACTS, where I was also introduced to the legacy of Honorable Balozi Waziri Judi Wakhungu as the 3rd executive director. So Judi, It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us, and I hope it's okay for me to refer to you as Judi over the rest of the conversation. Karibu
Thank you
sana.
very much, Martin. And yes, my name is Judi for this conversation. We're here to honor Professor Calestous Juma, and he also insisted that we either call him CJ or Calestous, so we'll do the same.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Judi. Judi, I want us to go over a set of 4 themes. Today's topic is on mentorship, and I'll want us to hear a little bit about your journey. So I'll have some background questions. I'll ask you a little bit about innovation and leapfrogging. I'll then ask you about mentorship, and I'll try get your personal reflection at the end and identify a way forward. Where do we go from here in service of Calestous? And what we want to begin the conversation is a reflection on yourself. You've had a remarkable career in environmental policy, science, diplomacy, and you're still doing a lot of great work. So when you look back at defining moments that shaped your commitment to sustainability, the role of science, technology, and innovation, and the roles that are played by those in sustainable development in Africa, what comes to mind for you?
Thank you, Martin. When it comes to what changed my mind into being a geologist and coming into the sustainability science was in the late 80s. And at that time, I had started communicating with CJ, with Calestous. Interestingly enough, at that time in the late 80s, he had completed his PhD on renewable energy at the University of Sussex, and he was focusing on ethanol at that time. And I was just embarking on my PhD studies at Penn State, where I was also now going to shift from strictly being a geologist to now coming into the science and policy arena. And it was very new at that time. Not many people understood it, and there were very few universities that were actually teaching that from an interdisciplinary perspective. Calestous' entry was from the social science, journalism, etc. That's where his background was. Mine was now coming from the earth and mineral sciences, and yet we connected. So it was Calestous at that time. There was another researcher, Khalil, I think. I've not been in touch with him in many years. And then myself. And we were now the pioneers of the renewable energy work, looking at the science and technology, looking at the development angle, but also the innovation angle. So that was really a defining moment for me because it gave me the confidence to say I'm not the only one thinking along these lines.
Okay, fantastic. And you've introduced this idea of interdisciplinary studies, an interdisciplinary approach. Your background to ACTS, the African Center for Technology Studies, where you are the 3rd director after Professor John Ouma Mugabe, who received the role from Professor Calestous Juma, you handed over to Dr. Cosmas Cheng. Reflecting to those times, what was it like leading an organization carrying forward this bold vision for science, technology, and innovation in Africa, given your background and that exposure to an interdisciplinary lens?
Well, everything I've undertaken, I've come with confidence. And it's the only way you can approach some of these challenges. First of all, leading acts is not for the faint-hearted. One has to be extremely brave to lead an organization like ACTS. But then having the close contact with Calestous, having close contacts with John, it made it much easier. Each executive director has their own footprint on the organization based on the challenges that are happening globally. So Calestous had his footprint. John definitely had his defining footprint and moments. When I was coming into ACTS, and again, here we are working with the global partners, this was the time of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. And the development goals were focusing on food and water security, energy security, agriculture, security, etc. So at that time, we aligned ourselves to the MDGs and with the global partners. The slight change that we made at that time was not only to influence the partners, the development partners, but also to have greater impact and influence in the regional economic communities within Africa. So that's what we focused on at that time. And again, continuing with Calestous' legacy of mentoring and training, at that time, we also strengthened our partnerships with many, many universities, not only in Africa, but also internationally. And the universities that we had strong ties with, as always, the University of Sussex, where Calestous had been, and where, you know, his supervisor for his PhD, Professor Norman Clark, also was there and also was on the, is still on the Acts Governing Council. Then we also established ties with the Open University. And with the Open University, again here, we had the opportunity of training the Acts officers at these institutions to extend further the works that we were doing together. We also, mostly because of Professor John Mugabe's connections, established very strong connections in the Netherlands, especially Wageningen, Maastricht, and Utrecht, where we continued doing that work. So I have to keep saying that, you know, here we're here to honor the legacy, and that's why I keep mentioning Calestous, so that we keep our eyes focused on that. Throughout that time, Calestous was very, very careful about never positioning himself as the founder. You know, he would always say that he is a friend of Acts. So we worked together seamlessly, but more like siblings. You know, rather than he never intimidated anyone with being the founder. And, you know, he gave us, for me, I had a carte blanche. He was there to advise, he was there to guide, but definitely not to micromanage. He had completely, when he handed over to John, and it's important to say this, when he handed over to John, he handed over fully to John. When John handed over to me, he handed over fully to me. But his values had already been well inculcated into the institution, and we all took that forward. Further, when he was now at Harvard University, he started at the Kennedy School, a course that I think you know in the executive programs, which was the first course in the Harvard Kennedy School executive programs on science and technology policy. And so, again, you know, Calestous being Calestous said, you know, Judi, this is an experiment, and I want you to be one of the first students to actually take this course. And so many of us participated in it, myself included, and mine it was in 2003, where we then all ended up with a certificate in science and technology policy, the first of its kind at the Kennedy School of Government. And later on, we encouraged the greater Acts partners and friends to also enroll in that particular course.
Okay, and that's very useful and good to know. I was introduced to Acts in around 2016 when I joined the Governing Council. And previously I'd been a student of Juma 06 to 08, so roughly 3 years after you had attended that course. So I'm quite familiar with that course. Yes. And I'm happy to say your legacy lives on. Professor Ogada is the current executive director. So between the handover from Cosmas, ultimately to Professor Ogada, that spirit lives on. And I'm not surprised to hear where that comes from.
Yes.
So if Professor Juma was with us today, what conversation do you think we'd be having with him on Africa's progress on STI? He invested in leadership, he invested in linkages, he invested that in yourselves as his successors. What kind of conversation would we be having?
Well, I think all of us, you know, in this forum may have a slightly different answer because he was so diverse. He was extremely diverse, but he was always interested in what is the emerging field from a science and technology perspective, and how can Africa position itself to be ahead. Remember, for him, leapfrogging was very much a value that he practiced. He practiced it, he taught it, and he expected it to be implemented by all of us. I think if I was speaking with him today, we'd certainly be talking about AI and what is the position of AI at the moment. Where does Africa lie? What are we going to do about it? Let's not be laggards. He was always an early adopter of technology, and he felt that we should be ahead. Let us embrace a positive technology, and then we can regulate it after. He was always concerned that we regulate before we even know the purpose of that particular technology. So I think he would be challenging us to say, let's adopt it. Let us be ahead. We know what the technology is. So why not train a cadre of individuals, of young men? Remember, he also believed very much in the youth, in young people. Let us train a cadre of them and let us position them ahead so that we have a footprint and that we have a stake to claim in the AI technology field. That we would definitely be discussing. He was also interested not only in diplomacy. Sorry.
Yes. Go ahead,
He was
Judi.
not only interested
Go
in
ahead.
diplomacy, but also in multilateralism. And in multilateralism, if you look at the state of the world today, we're completely in flux. We don't know whether it's topsy-turvy, but certainly we are in flux. And the new emerging group are now the BRICS. And so Calestous would indeed want us as Africans to align very closely with the BRICS. When it comes to the issue of AI, which I just mentioned, definitely China is in the lead. When it comes to not just the intellectual property aspect of it, but in terms of where is the hardware going to come from? And the chips are certainly being made in China. So China definitely is going to have a dominant role to play when it comes to AI technology. India, of course, also has a dominant role to play. So I think that Calestous would challenge us to say, let us align with the BRICS very specifically on this issue of AI. Let us leapfrog with them and align ourselves with them. That's just an example of what he would do. And I'm pleased to say, I think that Professor Ogada acts today. I do think that they have a program on AI. I stand to be corrected, but I think they do.
No, you're spot on. So Professor Ogada and team have a program. What was traditionally the digital economy program earlier this year was repositioned as the ACTS AI Institute with a significant presence in Konza, where ACTS has already invested well in advance, largely with public sector facing and ecosystem facing interventions that could lead very much to this leapfrogging you discuss. And if I could build on that, fascinating to hear you bring in the topic of AI as a practical example. You mentioned China, you mentioned India, you mentioned his prior experience being based out of the USA. In our context in Africa, if I was to extrapolate across the regional economic communities and the continent, Africa's environmental and socioeconomic challenges, how do you connect these two, the technology and this things? And here making a bit of a segue into your area of expertise and the areas you've served in while in government and operating in multiple other sectors.
Well, first of all, we need to, I think, have more respect for the environment, for nature, for ecology. That is the beginning. you know, if you ask somebody what their biggest probably asset is, the person will say my home. You know, my home is my biggest asset. If we look at our environment, nature, as our home, then we need to be good stewards of that home. We cannot plunder it as we do nowadays. We must protect it. And there are various ways of protecting it. Our experience from those of us from a science and technology perspective is to have the correct policies. To have the correct policies, not just a policy for a policy's sake, but you must have a policy and ensure that this policy is enshrined in the law. And the only way that you can enshrine it in the law is therefore, if it becomes violated, as it is prone to do, then that way, because it's anchored in a law, you have a mechanism of protecting it. I mean, we talk about our farming techniques, and more and more we're seeing that although advancements in agricultural science and technology, and even in nutrition per se, which is what ACT is working on now, I believe, although there are many advances, when it comes to the issues of health, and when it comes to how do you become a better steward of the environment, organic farming and the latest techniques of organic farming are becoming very popular. The other area I can talk about is issues, say, of pollution. Going back to the founding days when we were graduate students for Calestous and for myself and many others, we sought to take the approach of renewable energy. And you see, with renewable energy now, of course, I'm very pleased to say that when it comes to Kenya, about 70%, if not more, of our energy is renewable. And when it's renewable, of course, it means, using more solar power and more wind. And of course, for Kenya's example, geothermal energy as well. And then less so the fossil fuels and the pollutants. That's one way you nurture and take care of our home, the environment. When it comes to agriculture, of course, fewer chemicals in the agriculture, coming back to the issue of less dependence on the petrostates when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to energy. When it comes to biodiversity, again, very, very dear to Calestous. He served for several years as the executive secretary of the CBD, and his footprints remains, to this day. Always concerned about the biodiversity loss. And our biodiversity loss is also a huge concern even today. And much of this is what we have legislated. Much of this is what ACT continues to do. So those are just a few examples that I can think of, Martin. If you have some more, please add on to it.
No, that's fantastic. Actually, you've already foreshadowed a question I was going to ask. I was going to check what are some of the areas, what are some of the sectors that hold promise for Africa? So you've tackled a little bit of the issue of digital transformation. You've talked about AI. You've talked about environmental sustainability from a perspective of agriculture, from a perspective of being able to feed ourselves, health, nutrition. And also you've talked about renewable energy. Maybe the additional question I would ask is why you picked those areas. And then also, if I could weave into that, you've been a diplomat for many areas. How do we position Africa? And here, if you could speak to the younger generation, how do we tell our stories in ways that on the global platform, there's an appreciation that Africa leads? So there are some fantastic examples there.
Okay, several questions in one. I picked on those three, but I could also have added what you alluded to, which is what is the best position for Africa? Africa, apart from our human resources, which are phenomenal and continue to remain untapped, we have mineral wealth, enormous amounts of mineral wealth. Right now, there's a new scramble, as you know, for rare earth minerals. China has the lion's share at the moment, but also we have that rare earth minerals, which of course, are critical and vital to the electronic industry. So we have an opportunity there, but we also have to safeguard that opportunity. If we're not very careful, and as you can see, what is happening in polarized regions like the DRC, etc., if we don't carefully steward that mineral wealth, then the scramble for our mineral wealth from the northern countries will continue and will continue to be plundered. And so this is what we must guard extremely, extremely carefully, because given the resources that we do have the opportunity to lead the world in some of these rare earth minerals. When it comes to nurturing, the youth, the young scholars, as I would say, again, in the spirit of mentoring and in the spirit of leapfrogging, which was very much CJ, very much Calestous, we continue to guide them in this regard. We continue to guide them to pursue some of these areas, be bold. When Calestous started, he was very bold in terms of what he was questioning and the policy analysis that he was conducting at that time. We need to guide our youth to also leapfrog. And it also means that we have to prepare our curricula, especially at the university levels, to be more bold. Don't wait to imitate, as we are prone to do, what is happening in the northern countries. We already know what the frontier of science and technology looks like. We already know the value of what we have in terms of resources, both human capital and also, in this case, natural resource capital. That is the guidance that we should be providing our youth, so that we have a cadre of people that can not only be of service to us, but also service to the world. When it comes to diplomacy, very tough area, but what I did in terms of our bilateral engagements, especially with the European countries in which I served, apart from positioning our trade and our economics to be fair terms, but also for the EU to open up markets to our goods and services, I also promoted bilateral engagements in terms of education. So that way we were still continuing with Calestous' legacy of training and placing officers in strategic international universities. But I also continued that during my diplomatic tour of duty to open up more scholarships for the Kenyan youth, particularly in the technical areas, I would say in the STEM areas, but also opening up research exchanges of people to people in this particular areas. So there's quite a bit of scope in terms of the opportunities that can still be tapped. I know institutions like ACTS continue to do that with their strategic partnerships with Stockham Environment Institute, for example, and also with the University of Sussex. But that's what I would encourage. Look forward. Don't wait to adopt. We know what the frontier looks like, so that's what we have to train for.
Okay, fantastic. And a little bit later, I'll have a set of questions on mentorship. And I think you've already begun sharing some very valuable insights and talked a little bit about your experience in the diplomatic context. Before we finish this section, I also wanted to touch a little bit on your time as a minister. So being in the executive, spearheading a very specific sector, you had an illustrious career. You had multiple achievements as the Minister for Environment, Water, Natural Resources. I'm quite familiar I grew up in a homestead of a forester and a mother who was in the livestock area. My dad was in the forest area. I'll mention some of the key legislation. The Environment Act of 2015, the Forestry Act of 2015, the Climate Change and Water Act 2016, those acts, the Waste Management Bill. As you look back to your time, what were some of the factors that made these reforms come about, just briefly? And then specifically to that same audience, you have shared about diplomacy. For those young STI innovators, professionals, what can they draw as lessons on turning ambitious ideas into national policy? At the opening, you said laws matter. We need to entrench things in law. Any reflections? Any thoughts?
Okay, first of all, as a cabinet secretary, it was extremely tough. But I would say that anyone that has been an executive director of the African Center for Technology Studies just goes straight into being a cabinet secretary. It's actually very straightforward. And so we just hit the ground running at top speed because it's very familiar territory. So it wasn't easy. At the same time, we were the first group of cabinet secretaries that were considered technocrats, and indeed we were. But then you see, you're working with two principals that are consummate politicians, and that's how they were operating. And the two consummate politicians, of course, were the head of state and his deputy. So it was interesting in my case, because the Ministry of Environment, Water and Natural Resources at the time, we were the first lot of the cabinet of the Kenya Constitution 2010. So many of the services of the Ministry of Environment, Water and Natural Resources at that time were devolved. And because these services were devolved, the current state of the art in terms of the laws and pieces of legislation that we had were not matched to the realities on the ground. So that's why we had to hit the ground running at top speed. The first and most difficult being the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act of 2013, because I was able to deliver that within 4 months, I think. And this is a wildlife policy that had stalled for various reasons for more than maybe up to 20 years. It had stalled because of the differing perspectives on what wildlife conservation and management means in Kenya. The rest, I would say, were just as hard because, again, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 required public participation. And public participation meant going to every single county, the 47 county, to engage the public and to get their perspective. The advantage of that, it's allowed me to know extremely well all the governors at that time, all of them first-term governors. But in the case of the ministry, to work very closely with the Council of Governors and especially the Environment Committee of the Council of Governors. We're also now going to a bicameral system of government. So everything that had to pass in the National Assembly also had to pass through the Senate. So it made life challenging, but also very interesting. We often had to work, let me not say I can only talk about my experience. We often had to walk on eggshells because there was the temptation to consider us or to consider me a politician, which I am not. So I could not go into barazas, and talk about party politics because I was not a member of any party. I was simply there as a technocrat to advance, Kenya's legislation and policies, and then also to strengthen the state agencies, to strengthen the regulators, to strengthen organizations like NEMA, to strengthen organizations like the Kenya Wildlife Service, the Kenya Forest Service, and all of the other water body organization. So it wasn't easy, but being at ACTS and going straight from ACTS into the cabinet secretary position, I would say I had an easier time than some of my colleagues because we already knew, because of ACTS's partnership with the government of Kenya, many of the officers that I would now be leading were very familiar with ACTS, and I was also familiar with them. So we just hit the ground running at top speed. It wasn't easy, but we knew what to do. Now, what I would encourage the youth to do is to think along those lines when they're working. If it's an AI policy, as we've talked about, what would you do if you were to establish that legislation? What would you do if you were to advise the minister? What would you do if you had to advise, say, the dean of your university? These are the sorts of areas that we used to inculcate at ACTS, and I certainly continued with that at the ministry, making sure that all of my officers, who are extremely very well credentialed, by the way, but I always made sure that they had opportunities to participate in the latest training wherever it was offered, be it somewhere else in Africa or be it in Asia, but always to keep learning. It's a lifelong learning process, and that's really what I encourage the youth to do today. Ask the tough questions. A public office is your office. My office, for example, at the ministry wasn't my office. It was Kenyan's office. And so anybody, and if you could ask maybe even some people on this forum, I had an open door policy. And I would say, if you have any idea, come and tell me. And some of it was tough truths, but most of it was supportive.
That's great. And I can see a bunch of emojis and signs indicating there are people resonating. So for those who have joined us, we've not forgotten you. I see we've got questions in the chat feature. Please keep them coming. I'll spend just another maybe 4 or 5 minutes hearing from Judi and then open the floor. And then on the tail end, Madam Balozi, I will give you a chance to recap for us, maybe with some closing thoughts on the way forward. Where I wanted us to spend just a few minutes was on this topic of mentorship and leadership. It's been a consistent theme in all the points you've made. You've talked about how ACTS prepared you to engage in the executive arm of government. It was somewhat of a seamless transition, having been an executive director. You've talked about how Professor Calestous Juma in the early years, when you're thinking of your choices on graduate school, the focus research areas, and just generally your own career path was available and open doors. Could you reflect a little bit on mentorship and maybe 3 aspects of it? It's played a role in your journey that has come out clearly. Are there any thoughts you could share with younger ones, specifically around mentorship and leadership? Your own experience for the generations of my sisters, my daughters, my nieces, and all the colleagues I operate with in the various settings I am that look at you and see themselves. Any message specifically that goes to them? In the African innovation ecosystem, where you've had a very dominant time, again, on leadership and mentorship, any thoughts, any reflections on those? So let me start with those 3, and then a little bit as we get to the tail end, I may sneak in 1 or 2 more. But before that, I'll open the floor to some questions, and then we can finish off with about 3 or 4 more questions. Over to you.
Okay. Let me start with a mentorship. If you look at Calestous Juma's legacy, he's very, very clear, especially in his autobiography, The University Drop-In. He's very, very clear that mentorship played a key role in terms of his journey. And, and he cites several people from Nobel laureate Professor Wangari Maathai, those days at ELCI, I think it was called, Environment Liaison Center, from Professor Norman Clark, and several others. In other words, people were there to actually realize that this was a young, talented, person with unique skills, that needed to be given an opportunity, for further studies. He's very clear about saying that he was mentored, and in return, he also has continued to mentor several people. Every single week, wherever I am, I always engage with somebody somewhere who always had a connection, who has a memory of Calestous and how they engaged in some form or the other. Mentoring is rewarding, and it allows you to shape young people's minds, but most importantly, to knock on doors on their behalf and to give them that opportunity. I am a beneficiary of mentorship by very senior people myself, from throughout my undergraduate studies, graduate studies, into graduate studies, etc. It's a form of giving back. But also when you're in academia, it's what you do. You're training, and so that's also part of the mentoring. But also to the young listeners here, don't wait for that mentor to come to you. Also approach them. I've been approached by several people on LinkedIn especially, and as best as I can, I respond. I respond with the opportunities. I may not be able to see that person, but I would say, do you know that there's Martin Bai at Strathmore? And let me just say that I'm making the introduction. Really, that's all it needs. Or to put the word out there, there are scholarship opportunities in such a place. And so here you are, let us share this globally. But for the young people, listen to me carefully. Approach that person that can be your mentor. Don't wait to be selected. If we recall Calestous' legacy, which is what we're doing here today, he was very cavalier. He was very, very cavalier about, where he goes. For example, if we wanted to go to a meeting, would say, okay, perhaps, for example, I know the PS in such a ministry. Calestous will say, no, let's go to the president first. Who thinks about going to the president first? But that is what I learned from him. I learned from him that you just go to the president. The president is there for the public. And even if the president can't see you, you will be directed, as to where it is you should go. So for me, it's just to give hope and to encourage the young people to say that we're here, we're here for them. I don't have to see you. Martin doesn't have to see you, but tell us what your idea is. And no idea is small. And also, always put yourself in that position of the decision maker. Don't say that I'm a research assistant. Yes, you could be a research assistant at the moment, but think in terms of that issue, that analysis that you're doing. You think about that issue as if you are the executive director. Think about that issue as if you have to advise your government, or you have to advise other regional economic communities. And that way you will continue with the spirit of Calestous, and it's certainly the way I have worked. If I want to sort out something, I always go to the top.
Fantastic, fantastic. And that's very rich. When you mentioned that side of Calestous, when I was at the Kennedy School, I had the privilege of meeting the late Honorable Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, may his soul rest in peace, and the former head of the African Development Bank, Honorable Donald Kaberuka. And in some instances, in the very space, Calestous would actually just pull you in
Yes.
I've served on the governing council with Norman Clark, Dr. Francis Mangeni, all these individuals he talks about. So Judi, I think you're spot on, is just have people come into that orbit where they interact as Judi and Martin, as Tom
Yes.
and Judi. It's quite rich. I want to bring in
Can
some.
I tell you a funny story?
Yes, tell me.
About Calestous and the issue of presidents.
Yes.
I don't know if you recall this, but there was a period sometime in the mid 2000s where there was a movement of sustainability science.
Yes.
Right. And Calestous was, one of the pioneers of sustainability science. So he had gathered in an international group of thought leaders, from various institutions. And we had gathered for one of the seminal meetings, and that time we were in Mexico City, at that time being hosted by a number of institutions there, and also the University of Mexico, where Azadine had Calestous had some colleagues at the university. And so as we concluded our discussions there, and then, always when you have such intellectual gatherings, there's always a report. This is now a report from Mexico City. And so one evening, Calestous says to us, now we must go and report this to the president. We said, which president? We're thinking maybe the president of the university or something. And he said, no, the president. And the president of the president of Mexico at that time was Vicente Fox, President Vicente Fox. So we found ourselves, at the presidential palace the following day, presenting our paper to President Vicente Fox about sustainability science. That is how Calestous operated. Very cavalier, very formidable, but at the same time approaching all of this with humility, not with arrogance at all.
No, absolutely fantastic. And as we get to the tail end, I think it's what this format also allows us to do. In the audience, I know there are some individuals who appreciate this opportunity to be with you. You've been in those corridors of power. You've been in the trenches working on issues of science and driving impact in society as a technocrat. Let me give you some of the reactions. We have Jerry Omulo, who says Professor Calestous was also concerned or was considered practical solutions to be the most challenging aspect of African problems, from theory to solutions. So there's an argument that there could be more practice than theory.
Yeah.
We've got Elizabeth Awar, who introduces this idea of One Health. It's an emerging field, the need to mix technology in agriculture, water, sanitation, soil science, and medical. And she also talks of ethnobotany and gives a definition of that. And the question is, what we lack is capital and investors for partnerships. It's a strong challenge. So could there be any thoughts on that? We hear from Celia Nalwada, who asks, please comment on the bioeconomy, biotechnology, synthetic biology. You talked a little bit about organic farming. What about this other aspect of combining biology and all these new advances? She says she had you when you said we legislate before we understand, talks about this, I think, as a case study and the diplomatic challenges around that. It has a lot of potential. Your thoughts? I'm absolutely delighted to see Professor Shem Wandiga. He's my boss as the Dean of the College of Scholars at Arts, one of the arms at Arts. He says he first met CJ when he was a newspaper reporter at the Nation newspaper, and he was very keen about environmental pollution. Professor Wandiga, an absolute delight to have you here. You also added that given the collapse of the G20 meeting in South Africa, two issues are important to note: good governance, adding value to our resources, Africa's wealth, extracting renewable oils, alcohols in our plants, improving quality of metals. So maybe some thoughts on that high level. Judi, and I'm just giving a snapshot of what we've gotten. You don't have to answer each in detail. And then finally, absolute delight to have our current executive director, my boss at ACT, Professor Ogada. Glad to know you had a smooth transition from ACT to government as a CS due to your experience. He's keen to know what that transition to diplomacy was like. So Judi, you've got mentorship you're sharing here across the generations, across disciplines. You can pick any of those, maybe reflect on any of those. I've tried to give you a snapshot of what we have. We may be running about 10 minutes behind, quietly behind the tent. I will talk to Angela and plead for just an extra 10 minutes, but over to you, Judi.
Okay, I'll just, first of all, thank you, all of you for all of those wonderful perspectives. So I will just, I think all of them are very much on point. I would say when it comes to ethnobotany, again, extremely important. And, these are areas where I know that JQAT, has done some formidable work on ethnobotany. But again, there are many opportunities. I know, for example, opportunities to work with very high-tech labs in France. When it comes to STEM areas, Kenya and France, which I also enhanced during my tenure as the ambassador, very serious partnerships on such areas. When it comes to biosynthetics, this leadership is actually being taken by IUCN, and I know in the recent Congress in Abu Dhabi, the issue of biosynthetics was discussed there. I don't know what the country position is as the outcome of the Congress, but I think if it's Elizabeth who asked that, that's one place that we can look at. When it comes to practical solutions, I think the question was, I don't remember the gentleman's name now because I'm just reflecting on what I heard. In terms of practical solutions, indeed, Calestous was very much an advocate of those practical solutions. And I'm glad that Professor Wandiga is here because he has certainly been a leader when it comes to ICT in terms of those practical solutions. Something that I think he continues to do even with the Kenyan diaspora at the moment. I think the other from Professor Tom, if you're preparing to be a CS, I'm sure you will make a very smooth transition. Just avoid the politics, but I know you'll make a very smooth transition from ACT to whatever it is, the powers that be appoint you to. It is a smooth transition because, as I mentioned, being the executive director of ACT is not for the faint-hearted. One is always you have to be nimble, you have to be diverse, but then also it segues into the other. The policies that we deal with, the policy analysis, environmental legislation, etc., all of that actually prepares you for the diplomatic cadre because we're dealing with, first of all, at ACTS, that's where many of the negotiators are being trained. And so the negotiators are already being trained. And then when they are put on that platform to negotiate with other countries, that is the beginning of the diplomatic training. It's not specifically mentioned that it is, but it actually is. It lets you know what to give and what to take. But also, when you put yourself in these international fora, you have to come from a formidable and solid preparation and serious grounding in the subject in which you are engaging. So I think those are some of the few that I can reflect on what I heard.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think you've covered them across the board. I'll just share one more reaction. This one you don't need to respond to. It's an amazing story. Moses Wanyama Wanjala tells us he assisted Professor Calestous Juma and Alison Phil Juma. Alison is oversees our trust, Calestous Juma Legacy Trust here in Kenya. She's a fellow trustee along with a colleague, Jacqueline, based in the US, and we are hoping Eric will be joining us soon, the son to Alison and Prof. Calestous. So when he was researching on local fruits and vegetables in Bungoma, Moses was mentored by them. This is in Western Kenya. They inspired, mentored him. He was a role model academically, started with a certificate in agriculture, and now have a second degree. So I think those are amazing stories. And Angela, as we prepare to hand over to you, and you can tell us more about these mentorship opportunities, I think it's stories like Moses's that it will be great to hear more about. So maybe a parting shot for Judi. As you look back at your time in academia, government, diplomacy, do you have any guiding principles that have sustained your leadership in your various roles? As a parting shot, is there any message you want to share with young Africans who aspire to live transformative change? I think you've done that repeatedly over the session, a forward vision, thriving, self-determined continent. And then also, just as you think of the African innovation ecosystem, and speaking to that next generation, public sector, private sector, any parting shots on mentorship, leadership that they can carry along? It's been a fascinating conversation. You get the last word.
I think mentorship, I've touched on the importance, but the success, our success, Calestous' success, my success was based on the networks that we built. You know, the people that you're sitting with today are the leaders of tomorrow. You don't know where you're going to be. The advice I would say is don't burn bridges. It's a waste of energy. Build that network and continue to solidify that network, because these are the people that you're going to be engaged and to lead whatever institution you choose to. Think big. Don't hold yourself back. When you think or you're planning your pinnacle, especially for the young audience, think big. You know, here's Michael Wanjala who's saying he stumbled into Calestous, and that has enabled him, you know, to build a career solidly based on a case study in Bungoma. So I would say for me, I think what distinguishes Calestous and also what I followed, you know, like a younger sister following a younger brother, and his footprints was establish the network. Don't burn bridges. I know we tend to do that in Kenya. It's really unnecessary. Every single person on this forum today is a potential partner, in some formidable way. Assist if you can. Certainly assist if you can. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. And don't be deterred by the position. These positions are for everybody. Just say, I'm ready. You simply put your hand up and you say, I'm ready. And if you're ready, you'll be given the opportunity. So don't be shy. And those are my parting shots. But most importantly, keep that network.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Balozi. Thank you very much, Waziri. Thank you very much, Madam. I give you the accolades, all those titles, and thank you for sharing and demystifying them. As I close, Angela, I want to hand over the warmth to you. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm particularly honored that we had our Executive Director, Professor Ogada, here with us, our Dean College of Scholars, Professor Shem Wandiga, and I know she's hiding somewhere behind the scenes, Dr. Kilelu. Thank you so much, Catherine, for being part of this leadership, and Fiona and Peter, you are part of the team. Over to you, Angela. You can share with us more about the mentorship opportunity as you close for us. Asante, Judi, and all the best in all your current endeavors. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for leading us today. And a huge heartfelt thank you to you both, and to you, Judi, for the conversation today, which truly affirmed mentorship is one of the major keys to African development and transformation. I myself benefited from Calestous' mentorship as well. I think we all are touched by it, and this idea of lifting people up the ladder behind you, and women especially, I think, you know, and with humility. For me, that was one of the points that really came through, is just so important. So yes, in that spirit, I want to mention that the Calestous Juma Legacy Foundation will be launching a mentorship program in 2026. And today we are collecting early expressions of interest from potential mentors. I put a link in the chat to a Google form where we're collecting contact information. Just the contact information at this time. This is not a commitment. We are simply collecting interest. And as our program develops, we will reach out. So if any of our participants here today have thought about becoming a mentor to young people, have wisdom and experience to pass along, have been inspired by today's conversation about mentorship, or have benefited from mentorship yourself, please click on this link and fill out the form. You'll learn a little bit more in the description, and we would reach out to you as soon as we have a little bit more development on the program itself. So with that, I think I will close our program today, again, with the biggest heartfelt thanks to you all, to the team who helps put this together with me, and yes, we just send our biggest gratitude to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.